Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is William Oldroyd, a theatrical director turned filmmaker whose first feature, Lady Macbeth, is in select theaters now in the US and Canada and opening wider this Friday, August 4th. Set in the middle of the 19th century, it's a nasty little character study with a knockout central performance from Florence Pugh, and you should definitely check it out if it's on a screen near you. Will chose Caché, Michael Haneke's 2005 thriller starring Daniel Auteuil and Juliette Binoche as Georges and Anne, a Paris couple whose comfortably bourgeois life slowly begins to come apart when Georges starts receiving mysterious surveillance videotapes of his own home and concludes that they must be related to something in his past. It's one of Haneke's best films, slippery and harrowing in all the right ways, and it sticks in the head like few of his others. In fact, when I made my list of the best films of the last decade for Now, Caché came in at number 4, between Children of Men and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. But this isn't about me, is it? This is someone else's movie.
This was the Haneke film that introduced me to Haneke. Because once I saw this in 2005 in my local independent cinema, I then wanted to see everything. So I then went and found in the, it doesn't exist now, but the DVD store, which I had a local one of those too, had the box sets. So then I started with Seventh Continent.
Oh, good. So that's right. Haneke had a much better representation in the UK than he did in Canada anyway. It was really hard to find his films if you hadn't seen them theatrically.
Yeah.
I started with Benny's Video.
Did you?
Which was screened. Yeah, I reviewed that for the Toronto Star in '92 because I'm old. And we saw it in a room smaller than this, a tiny little screening room. Yeah. And it was excruciating in the best possible way. But that film, much like Caché, you don't really see anything truly disturbing. You're just exposed to it constantly. And then it's just...
Well, I like that. In Benny's Video, I love the fact that actually the murder you don't see. Mm-hmm. You know, it's
just the sound.
But it felt theatrical. You know, I mean, in the sense that, you know, I knew Haneke, once I started to look into his work and his life, I knew that he had started in theatre as well, and thought, you know, that it was far more intelligent to do that, especially if you're going to basically be seeing it through a video camera, which is the sort of point, wasn't it, in Benny's Video? Mm-hmm. And then it was actually the absence of anyone in the frame, but you knew what was happening just outside of the frame, which was more terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
And what you could hear. You don't need to see it to be absolutely appalled in that moment.
Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't stop either. In much the same way that in Caché, in Amour, he uses unbroken takes to just trap you in space with suffering.
Yeah.
And Caché's suffering is much more existential. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, what was your experience of it? How did you find it when you watched it for the first time?
I thought it was compelling. I mean, really, I thought I needed to see it again. So I went and watched it again. And then when I was able to sort of make sense of it a bit more, I mean, I think part of it was that I was fully expecting to be told at the end who had done these things, and wasn't. And then it was the first time, really. I think about when I was a kid, when I was maybe about 11 or 12, I read this Agatha Christie book, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. It's the first time I had ever experienced an unreliable narrator.
Oh, okay.
And I remember sort of, after I finished the book, going downstairs and seeing my mum and just saying, I can't believe I've been lied to.
Yeah.
It really shocked me that up to that point, every book I'd read, you know, if it was first person narrative, you were taught to trust that person. You know, that was the one thing you could rely on. And I felt like with Caché it was the same thing, which is actually, here was a filmmaker, you put yourself in their hands and then they're going to essentially rob you of satisfaction, or they're going to actually really make you a participant in that respect, that you are going to be asked to think really quite hard during the film about what, and to subvert all of those traditional traits, plot points, you know, the sort of set up things. You know, I thought that was the that was the brilliance of it for me. That it, and then once I started looking at the other films, I realised that there were many more examples of how he did that sort of more blatantly, more obviously. You know, in Funny Games, for example, you know, really playing with the audience. You know, in terms of rewinding scenes and directly talking to camera and so on.
It's much more. Funny Games is one of the films I'm amazingly purely. I don't even know what the phrase is. I'm pure digital on Haneke. I either love them or I hate them.
Yeah.
There is no middle. He has yet to make a movie where I'm thinking, that's all right. And Funny Games I find infuriating because of that, because it takes away any sense of fair play, I suppose. The tacit agreement between the director and the audience, which is that he's not going to cheat. And generally when that happens, it's bad writing, or it's somebody just trying to get past the audience, hoping people don't figure out what's been cheated or what's been left out. Or I just saw a film this morning where there's a shootout, and 5 minutes later it's irrelevant, and an hour later you're thinking, why did that even happen?
Yeah.
There's nothing that comes from that, except that you get to see people get shot, and then you start thinking about the characterizations of the people who were doing the shooting and all of it, and it's just like pulling at a thread. Funny Games, it's deliberate and it works because it's earned in its blatant dishonesty, but I was still mad at it, and I like that. I mean, I get that, and that was what Haneke said, right? And like, if the audience stays till the end of the film has failed.
Yes, exactly.
But we're going to stay. It's a weird presumption, because of course we're going to stay. We're there to find out how it
I think he said if you leave, you don't need the film. I think this is
that
what
works
basically as well. That's sort of actually, it's those who stay who need to see the film to understand. But that playfulness that you're talking about, the sort of manipulation, or whatever you want to call it, for me, I love the fact that, you know, we know, like when I was studying drama in terms of, you know, becoming a director, it's that whole thing. If in a Chekhov there is a gun, you know it's going to be used. Well, absolutely, he shows us the knife at the beginning of Funny Games. You know it's in the boat. He even does a close up, so you know that it has significance. And then just at the moment they bundle her into the boat at the end, you think, well, at least there's a knife there. Right. They toss it over the side, and I just thought, absolutely playing with us in that respect. You know, I thought that I saw that as brilliant, even though I know that for others it could be deeply infuriating. You know.
I don't mind that, because if you are doing that to hook me, to sort of
make a point
to
as well,
pull that out. It's as long as he remembered it was there. That's all. I simply ask that you follow through on the things you've shown me. Whether they're of help or not. And in Cachet, the absence of an answer, the absence of guidance, the fact that there is just this incredible dispassionate eye throughout the entire film, it makes me think of something Danny Boyle always says, which is that he treats his characters as specimens.
Right.
And he's curious. When he starts the project, he's just as curious as the audience should be to see what happens under certain stressful situations. And Cachet felt that way as well. It's an experiment being performed by an unknown experimenter, but of course it's Haneke. A friend of mine actually, Adam Naiman, speculated that Auteuil is sending them to himself and just doesn't know it, and is unconsciously.
That's really interesting, isn't it?
But he recognized the handwriting.
Right.
So it's like some kind of pure psychotic break. But it doesn't. Like, it ultimately doesn't matter where they come from. The effect is what's important.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's right. You know, it could be that they, you know, in that sense, are a figment of imagination. It is a sort of message from the past, isn't it? That's essentially what it is.
Yeah.
It's just it's a revenant somehow. It's like something which is associated with his whatever guilt he feels, which he's buried so deep, and then in that moment is forced to confront it. You know, I think that's something for me, which is that, you know, I can see that in life. You know, I can see those people who have buried that trauma, whatever you want to call it, the sort of guilt they feel towards something in the past, and actually then you spend your whole time essentially building an environment which protects you against that. And I really feel like this couple have done exactly that. They've created a sort of safe place in their lives. That's the sort of the whole notion of being bourgeois, isn't it? That when something like that, a letter is then, it then penetrates. That's when it comes into that it is the fear of that existence being shattered or whatever, or threatened or destabilized. I suppose that's the thing. And for so long, people have said to me, "Oh, you should make work that comes out of your personal experience." I always felt like where I'd come from was so essentially mundane. That my upbringing was so sort of tedious. But it's those very things that Haneke is looking at, and that he makes them compelling and thrilling, isn't it? Which it is that sort of that middle class, that bourgeois existence, and all of the sort of fear and paranoia associated with it. That's what that he's through all of his work. I think he's really looked at what happens when that world order is questioned or challenged.
Well, I was going to say, it is a different type of home invasion, but it's the same essential premise as Funny Games. It's the Time of the Wolf. It's, even Betty's Video is sort of about the cancer inside of the bourgeois existence, which is just a child that they can't understand, let alone control, but something that they've created is run amok. It's always, maybe not The Piano Teacher so much, because that's about a collision of damage, but it's always inside you. That's the most disturbing thing. Or maybe not so much in The White Ribbon either, which that's one I've never really settled with, because it seems to suggest that World War I could have been avoided if they just killed a bunch of children in this one village. And I think that's a little naive. But the soul sickness aspect of it is there.
Well, but it may be that I felt that in some way those kids that we met in White Ribbon were going to become the people who would join the Nazi Party.
Yeah, they're the next generation.
And so it's sort of, maybe it's a little bit too simple to sort of say, what are the things that happened to them in their experience, in their upbringing, which might help give us an answer for the atrocities that happen later on. But, because it's not that clean cut, is it? But
and they're perpetrating the atrocities, so perhaps it's not so. It's that whole it's the metaphor I think that I have the most trouble with, because it's simply about condensing and compacting and telling this single community story, which inevitably has to have more meaning than it can ultimately sustain. Maybe it's just my own tick.
I think it's the only film of his that has a narrator. I think so, a voiceover, which is interesting. Which was obviously then rare for him, to use those things.
But that's what lets you make the Nazi jump, right? Because you're looking back through history.
I see.
Through the flashback structure. I think that's what lets us all do it.
Yes.
Cachet could easily be narrated by whoever is shooting the video. When you think about it, you could add a diegetic level of narration that's still not audible to the characters.
Yes.
In between sequences, but I still think it wouldn't help. The mystery is the most satisfying thing about it, is the fact that it isn't a satisfying mystery that we'll never know.
And this is what he says, isn't it? The whole point is, if you leave that film thinking, "Oh, who was it?" you've missed the whole point. It is about why, and that I think it's the first time, as I said before, it's the first time I ever actually thought about what happens when I go and see a film.
Yeah.
That for so long you give in, don't you, to the conventions of genre.
Sure. Yeah.
And for the first time, I was being challenged in that moment, and I thought that. Yes, that was. I was being invited to participate. That was the crucial thing. I think it's why he fundamentally changed the way I looked at making. Because at that time I wasn't making films at all. It wasn't until much later. So it was even in theatre. Thinking about how you can. I think we're probably way more open to sort of manipulating an audience on stage. In theatre work.
Well, we're already doing so much of it. As members of the audience, you're filling in all the context. Cinema makes you lock into that space. You're seeing what's on the screen, and whatever else is happening is directly related. It has to be directly related, because we're all pointed in the same direction, looking at the same image. Theater even the angle from which it's viewed will change the audience's experience, right? If you're up in the mezzanine instead of the orchestra pit, you'll have a different experience. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly. And also you are looking, you're able to choose where you want to look on stage, which is, I think, one of the great things about those sort of static long shots that he takes, which is then you are, again, able to choose where you look. You sort of interrogate the frame far more when it's there for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Then you're looking for clues.
Yes.
And it's actually making you think, I'm not being led in this moment to believe something or follow something, because somebody isn't taking me into the mid and then the close-up and then the reverse. There isn't that sort of grammar that we're so used to. So what do we do? And that's the... Again, it asks something of you. You're being asked to actually do some work.
Yeah.
Which is what we're very used to in theatre, because that is you choose your close-up in the theatre, I suppose. It's presented to you in wide, and then you choose where to look and where to focus in on. And that's what I love in Haneke's films, and what I wanted to bring into some of my own stuff. That sustained long shot, especially if something can play out in real time, and the only relief you have from that moment is if you are actually to look away from the screen, or as in the case of Funny Games, if people were to leave the cinema, I guess.
Yeah, if you flee, do you win? You don't with Cachet, because you'll never know.
Yeah.
And of course, you'll never know.
Yeah.
it is a different sort of play that he's doing on the audience. He's messing with us in exactly the same way he does in his other films, but he's doing it in a much more cerebral, rigid way than Funny Games. Sort of challenges you to stay with it and plays that. It pushes you away, it pulls you closer, it makes you sympathize, it makes you lose empathy.
Yeah.
Cachet just picks at one little part, and I've been trying to come up with an appropriate metaphor for the act of watching it on repeated viewings and watching it again and again, and it's like scratching at a hole in the wall and hoping you can see through it. You never will.
No.
Because the film won't reveal anything it hasn't already shown you. And I love that about returning to cinema. You can see a different version of a play, or you can see a different production even, depending on when you visit it and when you revisit it. But films are fixed in time. They never change. We change. And so,
very interesting.
Your experience. A friend of mine used to say that the rules of the game was his defining cinema, because every time he revisited it, he would empathize with a different character.
Right.
And it took him 4 or 5 viewings to realize that it was him, not the movie. You're just aging into a new perspective.
You can say, well, that film's dated, isn't it? No, it's not the film, it's you.
Yeah, exactly. You just don't like what you remember about that period when you first saw it, or who you were, or any of those things.
I've actually had some of those experiences when I've tried to explain to somebody a shot that I'm looking for. I've said, it reminds me of this film, let's watch it. And when we've gone back to watch that, I've completely misremembered it.
Yeah.
Completely misremembered the opening of Rosetta, for example.
Okay.
I really thought that it started with her running through this factory, escaping these men, but it doesn't. It starts somewhat in another way.
That's right.
And I thought, why did I remember it like that? It's interesting, isn't it, what we have selected?
It's what you retain, right? It's what you take away from the experience in the most vivid moments.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where it should start.
Yes.
Like if you were telling that story, that's where you would open.
That's where I wanted to start the film, yeah. Exactly.
It is fascinating. I mean, these are all unchanged and fixed, and with the exception of, Star Wars, they'll be the same every time you revisit them, every time they're reissued. Maybe the color temperature will change.
Yes.
But whatever secrets they hold, they'll be the same secrets. Lynch's films are the same way. He'll use time to make you drop your guard. That moment in Fire Walk with Me where a pan suddenly becomes terrifying, and he repeats it in Mulholland Drive as well, with the thing behind the Winkies. And those shouldn't work on second viewing. Those moments shouldn't be as frightening, but of course now you've built in your apprehension and the audience is primed. Watching the remake of Funny Games was remarkable to me because other than the breed of the dog, everything's identical.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But then you realize, it's a golden retriever now. I mean, that actually popped out at me, and I experienced the story differently because it was a different dog.
And they were made, was it 10 years apart?
Yes, or 11.
11 years
It might have just
apart.
been when they were released, in 96 and
So Haneke had changed.
That's true.
I'm actually trying to make something he'd made before was impossible, presumably, because he was a different person.
Yeah.
And this was one of the big things for me that coming to making a film for the first time, because what I love about theatre is the sense that every night it will be different. That's the thing that actually as a filmmaker, as a stage director, if it's not perfect, it doesn't matter because you've got tomorrow. And then you can always chat about it afterwards in the bar and talk to each other and just say, what should we do tomorrow that's, or wasn't quite working, but we know that we can get there and make changes. With the film, when we brought it to TIFF last year and we had the premiere, everybody said, are you not nervous? I said, no, because I was going into it in the same way that I would go and watch a play, which is that we can always tweak it and change it, but of course it's fixed. And it was only in that moment that I introduced it on stage I thought, I can't, it's set, it's totally set. Nobody has ever seen this film before. We never had a test screening. And the judgment now, which is about to come to this film from 700 people, however many are in that Winter Garden, the buck stops with the director. And it was the first time in that moment I realised everything on the screen that people will see will think it's because of a decision you have made, which ultimately it is.
Yeah.
And so that sort of shared experience that you have as a stage director had gone. And then I suddenly became nervous. Way more nervous than if I was watching a play.
I can't imagine why. Yeah, it is. It's a thing that is inexplicable, isn't it? This sudden sense that this is the only chance you get to see it fresh.
Yeah.
And you must have, however many dozen times you would watch it in the process of post-production too.
Yeah.
You can't have the same reaction. So how do you process that? Did you stay for it? Did you watch it with the audience?
Yes, I sat between Alice, who wrote it, and Fowler, who produced it.
Okay.
Also, I was quite interested to see how an audience would respond to it. The maximum number we'd had was about 30 cast and crew screenings.
Oh, so
but they were the people who'd made it.
Yeah.
So it was met with absolute silence because they were all just watching what I had done to their work, basically.
Yeah, they were evaluating it.
Whereas the response we got in Toronto was, they were very vocal and supportive audience. People were laughing and cheering in a way I hadn't expected them at all.
Oh, nice.
I hadn't even sort of planned for it. And you can't really predict that's going to happen, can you? But they seem to get behind it. It was a very happy experience. Of course, it could have gone the other way. It could have gone completely the other way. But then, it's also a funny thing, about standing by your work. In a way that you would never paint a picture and then stand in the gallery by the painting, waiting to hear what people thought about it.
Yeah. Someone will. That's inevitable, right? Someone is going to do that now.
But in a way, you can move on. You can paint it. You don't even have to put it up yourself. Give it to someone to put up, and then just carry on. And you're completely uninfluenced by an audience.
Right. Yeah.
Unless you need people to buy your work, then maybe actually but if you're not really interested in that, then you can just keep painting.
Well, it doesn't have a performative aspect, right? It's a fixed work in the same way that a book might be, but music, cinema, those are things that you have to experience in real time.
Yeah.
So I think there's some unspoken contract where the feedback is just as important, because you need to it's like finding out people listen to podcasts at 1.25 or 1.5 speed. Right. I can't abide. Why would you do that? That's horrible. I don't even like watching PAL DVDs because of the 4% speed up. I can tell. Cinema and music and theater are, and maybe television too, I suppose, are just designed to be experienced at a determined pace. Yeah. So you would want to make sure that was being appreciated, right? That the laughs were coming in the right point, that the suspense rises when it should. And
I guess that's something that you work out in the first instance with the writer, and then with the actors, and then in the editing.
Yeah.
And that's something I really didn't realise before making this film, that actually pace is something that is absolutely to do with that final phase in the edit. You can totally change. Because I was trying to get it in performance, is what you would do
on stage.
rehearsal, on stage, but actually you can really change performance in the edit in terms of pace. I mean, you can't change quality of performance and instinct, and what they, of course you need to have that there, but yeah, and I think that's, or in the case of Haneke, the shots that you use, the selection of shots that you have.
Yeah, I was going to bring it back to the actors too, how Auteuil and Binoche are just utterly present, even when they're not present for each other. When the marriage is starting to shift, when the poles are coming apart, they are utterly in the right rhythm for the film, which is a rhythm that I don't know that Binoche does very often for other directors. I mean, she seems to slot in differently in this film than she does in, say, the Kieslowski film or this or a number of American movies she's made. She just feels like she inhabits this one, and Huppert does it too, but she's worked with Haneke so many times, it just seems natural at this point that they find each other's rhythm. But Binoche was a real surprise for me because she's so watchful and so careful right up until she isn't and doesn't have to be. I think
that Haneke must know what he wants, because there are no cuts in those moments. He has it in one shot, and the camera might move, it might sort of track a bit and then come and rest in a certain place, but ultimately the rhythm is the rhythm of performance, and then you cut to the next scene. So he must know, as the creator, that is going to be the rhythm of the film. That each component is going to work to, because that's the thing I found very difficult when we got to the edits. What if it just doesn't, or it's too slow, or it's tonally wrong in the moment we need it to be this or that? Yeah. Well, he must have total mastery to know this is the pace and the tone it needs to be in this moment.
Yeah.
So that he doesn't have the. Maybe he has the coverage. Who knows? It would be interesting to ask Haneke. Although I suspect he doesn't. I mean, I just really feel like I can't imagine he would get the reverse just to be sure.
Yeah. No, he seems. I mean, and Cachet very much seems to be set up to emulate surveillance.
Yeah.
We're seeing everything in wide shots and static mostly, and camera placement is very rigid, and we might as well be watching someone watch them even when we're not. It's just sort of matching the video footage that way. And I think also he does it in Amour as well. The camera's much closer. He just waits for people to crack. That's his thing. And they usually do.
Yeah.
Because that's what he wants. That's where the story has to go to make it a Haneke film, really, to make him interested in telling the story in the first place. The rupture, the fragmentation, the split in the marriage, all of these tensions are the things that we're there for, really, whether we know it or not. That's what's coming. And what really gets me about Cachet is that you could pull back and say, oh, this is because of this thing that he's buried, but she doesn't know. So is she picking up on how are they reading each other? And then, I've been married for long enough that now I know. In 2005 I didn't. Now it's like, you can know someone well enough to see them coming apart even if they don't know it.
Yes, exactly.
It's just how familiarity works, it's how intimacy works.
Yeah. And
when those things become, I was going to say when they become weaponized, but Haneke weaponizes them. The characters don't. And that's what makes his films so distinctive, and I think that's what makes Cachet land the way it does.
Yes.
It's tension without release. Because they get one, but we don't. We don't know. We don't find out. We have to leave with an incomplete story.
Yes.
And Amour is the closest thing he has to a happy ending. And it's only a happy ending.
It's a man who disappears.
Yeah, exactly. It's only a happy ending because we can believe that it means that the suffering has ended.
Yes.
In Cachet, it's just going to go on and on.
I see. Yes, that's what you mean. Yes, yes, that is a relief, isn't it? In the sense that the murder of his wife.
Yeah, well, and the end to his suffering too.
Yes, exactly.
That it's over.
Yes,
even if it means death.
That's Haneke's happiest ending.
It is. It really is. Maybe the piano teacher.
Yeah,
it's just.
Well, again, unanswered. I think this is very interesting. That it really challenges filmmaking. That you can leave it open ended, and then we can decide what happens next. And that then I really feel like that's what I have found this been so good in theatre that people come into the bar and they want to talk about what they've just seen and discuss it. Some people don't. They want to go home and just sit quietly and think about those things. That's the same with Haneke too. But absolutely, if you can carry on the conversation in the bar afterwards or in the restaurant or on your way home, that's everything. I think. Actually, the film doesn't end in the cinema. The conversation continues as you go on. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Lady Macbeth seems to have a sense of an epilogue as well, where you can just continue to figure out what's going to, or not what's going to happen. We kind of know. The trajectory of that character at the end of the film is laid out quite clearly.
Yeah.
But how will it happen? What will manifest? What new challenges? How? It's a thing that I think people are much more confident in than they might have been 10 years ago, where if a film ended that way, it would have been jarring, and now it's accepted that narratives can simply glide away or abandon their characters.
I saw White Ribbon in Mayfair, cinema in Mayfair, which, if you know, the area is sort of a very affluent area of London and so on, and it was in a sort of mid-morning screening, so the cinema goers were of a certain age and probably had very fixed ideas about what cinema was. Anyway, I'm saying this because at the end of White Ribbon, as it cut to black and the credits rolled, one elderly old gentleman just screamed "cop out" at the screen. And I feel like that was his feeling, which is that if there's no ending, then he hasn't thought of one.
Right.
But that's the opposite of Haneke, isn't it? Absolutely.
He knows what happens.
He knows exactly. I thought it's very interesting that was this man's interpretation of the end of a Haneke film. That essentially he didn't take the challenge, which is to go away and to talk about what might happen, but actually he just thought, this guy can't be bothered to give us the satisfaction of an ending.
I've sat here 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Yeah, I want satisfaction. I demand satisfaction.
But there's... I'm just... So many things are better without concrete endings. Endings diminish. Especially declarative ones on a story like that.
Yeah.
There is no "and they all lived happily ever after."
No.
There can't be. It isn't polar. There isn't a "they all did" or "they all didn't." You're supposed to be left with your reaction. Yeah, no, of course. I mean, that's Funny Games, maybe. I mean, that has an ending.
Yeah.
I don't...
Well, they sail away. Well, the ending is a new beginning, right? Because they go to the next house.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's going to repeat forever, I think. It's what I get that impression.
Yeah, and they have no past, they have no future, they just existed. That's the most disturbing idea, and it's the same with the tapes in Cachet. Here they are. What happens is up to you.
And Seventh Continent, you're given absolutely no justification or reason for why they do this thing. They just do it.
And it's all of them. Like, it's not just... There's no debate.
No.
There's no... It's the... what is it? I know there's one... It's not a Haneke film. There's a film fairly recently where a number of family members make a decision and some of them don't agree with, and they're forced into it. And it's a nightmare. It's horrifying to watch everybody forced to go along. And it must have been... It's not The Invitation. Some small horror film I saw a couple of years ago, and I remember thinking that this is exactly how it should go. Like, this feels real and therefore more terrifying. To know that you're trapped. Oh, The Sacrament. It's Ty West's film, The Sacrament. Yeah. To know that you're watching a situation that can't end well, but will end worse. And just the more time you sit there, I think it's what Eli Roth tries to do and doesn't quite get, because he's more interested in writing snappy dialogue than in following through to a nightmare.
Yes.
And there's no way out. And there's another half-hour movie. So whatever happens,
you're in now. That's it.
That's far more disturbing than not knowing anything, I think, is to witness somebody who does know what's coming and can't stop it.
Yes.
Try to resist anyway.
Yes, and I guess it's served, isn't it, in Funny Games? Let's make a bet.
Yeah.
I bet you'll all be dead by the end of, but by tomorrow morning, and you bet that you won't be. Yeah, and this is the point that they know that is the end is quite clear by that point, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, he's telling us. And that's a film that has the self-awareness to pull it off, to actually make that sale. God, cachet is playing a different game. It's a game with no winners.
Mm-hmm.
There are losers, but there are no winners. And
I always found it strange why he is never able to admit to his wife what he'd done, and that is the point of the film, of course, isn't it? Which is that the person he should share this with, he doesn't, because he's too embarrassed. In a way, the tenderest moment in the film is when he goes to see his mum, and they sit on the bed, and he just talks to her about Majid, and just says, what happened, and then he learns a little bit about his parents and so on, but it's his mother that he needs as the closest person in that respect, who is ultimately the person who was responsible for and sets up what was going to happen. But
and I wonder if that's not maybe the smartest comment on George on adulthood and responsibility. I mean, there are things that everyone carries with them that they don't have to. And there are things that we do when we're kids that we don't understand, but that haunt us. I mean, I'm sure everybody has those. And I don't know if... I mean, I'm trying to think of what horrors I have in my past. I probably don't have any. I'm Canadian. We don't, we don't have a tradition of that sort of thing. But there's thankfully no colonialism in my immediate past.
Yes. But he's sort of proposing, isn't he, that this very specific event with Majid's family is representative of the universal.
Sure.
That in some way it should represent all colonial guilt. I mean, it's a hard thing to sort of try and pin down.
But it's that microcosm metaphor again.
Yeah, exactly. Within that family dynamic.
And then it would make sense that he would talk to his mother, who was there, and be unable to even start having that conversation with his wife, who wasn't, and also who's only known him as an adult. And so he can't relate to her. I mean, you're not the same person you were as a child. I think that's sort of the point of the film as well, is that George doesn't fully feel he should be held responsible for something that happened when he was decades earlier.
Yes, exactly.
A different person.
Exactly.
And the only... I'm kind of sorry now that the film doesn't end with a pan out with every doorstep having a tape, every doorstep having an envelope at the end.
Yes,
because that's the logical conclusion. I mean, it's a collective culpability.
Yes,
that he is being forced to shoulder himself.
Yes, that's it. I mean, I think that even the idea of a sort of unreliable narrator in the sense that we don't even know what his memory was. Like when we see. Flashback, is it flashback or is it dream? When Majid as a young boy comes at him with an axe, is that what really happened, or did he cut the chicken's head off? I mean, was it just something that he imagined at the age of 6?
Was it a child? What is the child's perspective? How much does he even understand?
Exactly.
Or does he understand now?
And everything that happened after that was from a point at which he can't really truly remember. He's trying to. He wouldn't necessarily have decided to go to his parents against Majid because he was Algerian. It must have been because he was jealous of the attention he was getting, or something like that. Something that a 6-year-old would feel. Which, can you really blame a 6-year-old in that instance? But a 6-year-old would know that he was lying, sure, but
maybe not why.
Not why?
Yeah, and you don't. I mean, God, I don't understand my own motivations when I was 25. 6. But that's the crux of the story too, is that we are assuming that that's the incident that has resulted in all of this. And there's not even necessarily any proof of that. It's just where the guilty mind goes. And that's what makes me think that this could work with almost anyone. If you just started getting packages of, I suppose, DVDs now or YouTube links, I can't even imagine how you'd recontextualize it for the social media age. But if you came to feel persecuted, why would you feel that way? What would make you think you needed to be persecuted? His justification for it is this event.
Yes, exactly.
But what if it's not that at all?
Yeah. And actually, as you say, if everybody receives a package or a letter on the doorstep, you would find within your history something that you felt that connected to, and it could actually be the same message for everybody.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And triggering a different response.
And it would trigger a different guilt in every single person.
Maybe that's how you update it.
Yeah.
You go big.
Yeah.
You go global.
Well, there was Darren Brown. He's a sort of what do you call him? I suppose. Not as an illusionist or whatever, but he did that experiment, didn't he, where he got everybody to draw around their hand on a bit of paper and then write their birth date down and then put in an envelope, and then he produced for a group of 12 people a biography which they felt was so specific, a sort of not a sort of horoscope, but something equivalent to what's going to happen to them, and everybody was crying and saying, I can't believe he's spoken to me so directly and personally, and yet it was the same text for everybody. And I just feel like that is sort of what you could do in this moment here, which is that is the trigger, that thing, isn't it? But it's a child. Somebody must know, because it's the childish drawings, isn't it? Those
sense that it is something from his youth.
I also remembering there's those strange flashes that happen of Jude as a boy in the house with the blood coming out of his mouth, which are not. They are ghostly. They're totally out of the world of memory.
Just something the guilty mind burps up, or an association he hasn't yet figured out how to make. We're just seeing his perspective in it as it comes together. Yeah,
and it's really in Amour and in Kasha where you have this sort of fragility of the mind. So when he walks out and he's in his own nightmare and the apartment's flooded and so on, and then the hand grabs him in Amour. I mean, this is it's only there, isn't it, in those two films where I think we really see that sense of the mind playing tricks. Otherwise everything's quite sort of logical, rational, academic, cold.
Yeah, Haneke doesn't do much with surrealism or impressionism, but those
Yes.
moments are absolutely necessary, I think, to show us just how fragmented the characters are. Because if I'm doing this, you have to understand just how profound their disconnection is, and their panic.
Yeah.
Oh, he's so good at that stuff.
Yeah.
He really is. I resent his control, I have to say, because it can be exhausting, but it's ultimately rewarding. And I jokingly, but also seriously, this really did happen for an entire week at TIFF. I never ceased to get a laugh just by telling people that I had seen, and I did see this walking by the restaurant on the ground level of the Intercontinental. I did see Michael Haneke staring disapprovingly at a glass of water. See, that's it. Anyone who knows his work, that lands. That joke actually works. He was just focused on it. It was, his arms were below the table. He was sitting rock still. I mean, he looks like angry Christopher Lee.
Yes, exactly.
With his huge white beard. And just glaring at a simple glass of water which had been placed dead center. And I'm just wondering now if he arranged it so that everyone who walked past would see this image, because that would amuse him.
So good.
But it was, I've never spoken to him otherwise. I've never had the chance to interview him. We've passed each other in hallways a few times, but that is the only encounter I want to have now, because it's perfect.
Apparently he's quite jovial. I mean,
You would have to be.
Yeah, please. You hope so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But then this is what's interesting. I find this so interesting that he really is somebody who actually hates violence, I think. Somebody who has not encountered violence in his own life. I mean, in terms of like physical violence, has never, it seems from what I've read, has never actually sort of ever been involved in any violent acts, but is fascinated by it and fascinated to explore it in the same way that like Nicholas Winding Refn really wants to explore like quite grotesque acts of violence in his films, like a sort of pornography. Yeah, there's a sort of strange, but he's not. Doesn't seem to be a very violent man.
Right, and Haneke's approach to it is to study it. It's to be clinical about it. Whereas Refn wants to wade in and play with the prosthetics and get dirty and messy. Yeah. It's an austere cruelty that defines his films. Things are just happening because they have to, not because anyone particularly wants them to.
Yes.
And it's an infliction of chaos. Infliction of chaos? That sounds incredibly pretentious. It is the application of chaos to their marriage in Cachet that sets everything spinning, but it's also his own conscious his own conscious repression, I guess, because he's aware of what he's been doing. that finally can't be repressed anymore, that sends him on that path. It's just, it's difficult to describe because it works emotionally. It fits perfectly. It makes absolute emotional sense. It just doesn't make logical sense until you're in it. Yeah. And then, of course, every decision just follows.
He just wishes it would go away. I suppose that's the only reason I can think for why he might lie. He doesn't want to face up to it.
Mm-hmm. Like a kid, like a guilty child.
Yeah.
If I wait this out, you can see it in people who just don't have the emotional capacity to deal with responsibility. I mean, certain presidents notwithstanding and former mayors of Toronto, they're just, the idea that if you just ride it out, it'll go away.
Yeah.
And sometimes it actually does.
Yeah.
But George is an intellectual, so he knows on some other level it's not. He has the self-knowledge that the others don't. That
it's also the worst sort of accusation, isn't it, as well, for somebody like that, which is that somehow he is responsible for the abuse of somebody who was orphaned and Algerian in France.
Yes.
The context of that is everything. That wouldn't go down well in the intellectual circles in which he moves, in that TV show that he has, and the very bourgeois existence that he has there. That I think that's something. And whether he even did it, I mean, this is the whole. He doesn't even know. This is the whole point. But he resorts, and unfortunately, he just resorts to violence and to threatening behaviour when challenged.
And he fails his own,
which is very
standards.
childish.
Yeah. No, I mean that is the ultimate. I mean, my ultimate nightmare, I suppose, is that I'm ostracized from my circle for something I didn't mean to do.
Yeah.
But it would be something that for it to be something that I don't remember doing is even worse, I'm sure.
Yes.
We're at a point now. I was talking about this with John Ronson a few weeks ago, both on the show and off. That we're at a point now where the progressive side of the world is eating itself because people are deeming each other not suitably on board with the one specific thing that is most important to them, and that's where it all fractures. Whereas the reactionary side is simply in lockstep until their guy dies, they're behind him.
Yeah.
Or disgraces himself so profoundly, and we still haven't figured out what that is. But George's position seems even more tenuous. The more he digs, the worse it gets.
I just realised another film I could have brought in to talk about, which I absolutely love, is Force Majeure.
It's funny. I was going to mention Osland a few minutes ago.
Which is the same thing. Which is like, don't dig. Basically, if he had just said, yeah, I did it, and I'm sorry, it was stupid. But he cannot. In that moment, you can't lie. It was pure instinct.
Yeah, and he triples down on it.
I mean, it's what a remarkable film, really. And I think it's a great date movie. That is the perfect date movie.
For a last date,
But you've got to go and see it, because then what happens is when you go to that movie as a couple, you then become the second couple, which is his friend and his girlfriend. Where you then, because then it is, would you act in a similar way? That's the whole point.
God, and God help you if you do. Well, this actually brings us very elegantly to the final question of the podcast, which is, what, if anything, of Cachet or Haneke's work have you appropriated, borrowed, stolen, or incorporated into your own creative DNA? I mean, there are hints of it in Lady Macbeth, I think.
Yes. I mean, I was very aware that I didn't want to just basically rip off Haneke's. First of all, you can't, because it's his work, and he is so clever. I mean, I've tried so many times to dissect Cachet and to really think about how he has cobbled it together. I find it very difficult to do that in terms of the structure and so on. But I think the things that I feel like I share with him, which I don't think I necessarily drew from Cachet or his work in particular, but it sort of was useful to remind me of those things, was making the audience participate in some way, which is to essentially get them to ask questions through the film, through the viewing, not to provide the easy answer, but also not to obfuscate to the point where people want to switch off. There's a fine line, isn't there? Because it's about what information you reveal at what point, I suppose, isn't it? to be confident, bold with those longer takes. I think there's something which just feels very natural to me, having spent so much time as a director in theatre, seeing everything from one angle in the proscenium arch. Mm-hmm. My fear always was that my work would feel too theatrical, i.e. it would feel like it was seen from one position and not actually, I wouldn't have the confidence to move the camera into the necessary place. But actually where we need it to, like for example in Lady Macbeth, sometimes it's useful if the only option an audience has is to look away from the screen, you're not going to get the relief of the cut, or they have to leave, then actually that's what we need to do. Mm-hmm. To use sound as well, in the way that Haneke does. I mean, I think he's amazing in what he can create with sound.
And silence too. I mean, you keep music to an absolute minimum in the film.
Yes, exactly. I mean, and where he does use music, especially in White Ribbon, we've seen its source, mm-hmm. and then we can continue into the next scene. That's fine, but we would never, for example, just place it without there being an understanding of where it's come from. I think that's very important. Mm. And I think what I share with Haneke in that sense is that music can so easily make you, can assist you in what you are to feel, can sort of emotionally signpost mm-hmm. and carry you through a difficult moment. When Haneke wants you to do that work for yourself, I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah.
That's why some of the best score, the score I like, is essentially percussive. It's about rhythm and tempo. It's not actually about mood so much, that it's not about but he makes the scenes work in themselves through performance, and then you don't require music because it's working. You don't need the music to sort of smooth over the rough edges and the cracks, mm-hmm. and so on.
I think you'd rather watch people try to figure out how to feel than give them any suggestion of direction or guidance.
Yeah,
he just leaves us there.
And I like that. I mean, I really feel like, personally, I don't feel that cinema should necessarily, clearly he has a message, or it's not polemical, but it's not, and he's not trying to teach you anything. But there's a provocation. It's about being a provocateur, isn't it? It's about being a provocateur. It's about encouraging audience members to be. To participate in the experience of going to the cinema or watching at home, not giving all the information up front and allowing you to relax and just enjoy the experience, but actually, I feel like when I watched Seventh Continent, it actually had a physical effect on my body. I felt like it was like not a sort of tsunami in the sort of romantic sense of a huge arching, crashing wave, but the surge just of how that water just pushes and pushes and pushes and pushes, and I felt like over 90 minutes, however long it was just pushing against me throughout, and at the end I felt in bits. I felt absolutely shredded by the experience of watching this family sort of systematically destroy themselves.
Well, that's how I felt at the end of Benny's video, that first screening in 92. It's just, oh, okay, now I know what liver failure feels like. Yes, my entire body has stopped working.
Shut down in the cinema.
Yeah, just sitting stock still, not moving at all in this tiny theater.
Yeah.
Because the movie wouldn't let me breathe.
Yeah.
And that was a new experience for me.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And these are the things, that I think it's dangerous to try and emulate, and but ultimately these are useful things to just bear in mind, aren't they, when you are making something.
Well, you know what's possible, right? You can shoot for it if you want to, but you can also avoid it at all costs.
Yes, and maybe there's something which is a bit more sort of, I feel like in Lady Macbeth, certainly, and in the work that I like, the blood is pumping a bit more, in the sense that there's a sort of rougher quality to it. It's not quite as sort of methodically worked out, that in certain respects I'm following actors wherever they want to go, that the impulse to move is how you sort of end up blocking the scene. It comes off an impulse that they have, and that means that you're not then being quite so careful about camera position, but then you make sure that you have the emotion of the scene captured,
Well, for all the composition, for all the precision, it's a story about desire, and desire is messy, and desire moves.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes, and that's what we found, those jump cuts and the camera moving and out of focus and so on, it helps. I felt like there was a good correlation between what we were feeling and what we were watching and the way in which we recorded it, or which we captured it.
Yeah.
In the same way that when Catherine is essentially made into a sort of ornament, we present her as such in the centre of the frame as an object, and then we don't move the camera, just watch her she's in stasis basically. She's sort of preserved.
Yeah.
That's what she is. She's preserved.
It's the specimen shot. Sooner or later something's going to happen.
Yeah. And then she needs to, then what we were trying to do is then, if she needs to break out, then she has to physically break out of the frame. So the frame won't hold her. Up to that point she had been sort of squashed into the frame. And the only way of which she can sort of break out is actually to break through the frame. And that's where and then the camera is late to move and then follows her as she then starts to wake up. But I watched all of Haneke's films in preparation for this film, just so that, because for me it's the equivalent of sharpening the pencils. You just remind yourself of, he is the master of composition, of structure, of performance, all of those things, and actually it's just useful to remind yourself of what is possible. And he's a great standard, isn't he, to sort of have there, to compare yourself to,
Yeah.
Never find, but
don't worry, if he can be angry at a glass of water, he can destroy all of us.
Yes, exactly.
My thanks to Will Oldroyd, whose new film Lady Macbeth is in theaters in the US and Canada right now, opening wider on Friday, August 4th, and coming to DVD and Blu-ray in the UK just 3 weeks from today on August 21st. If you can, though, see it on a big screen. It's gorgeous. You can find Will on Twitter at WA Oldroyd, all one word, and you can find Cachet on DVD in the US from Sony Pictures Home Entertainment and in Canada from Mongrel Media. There's also an all-region Blu-ray available in the UK from Artificial Eye that's pretty good, and not too expensive. It's like £9 right now. The film is also available on iTunes and Google Play. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, that would be very kind of you, and if you're the one who's been sending me these tapes, I gotta say they're a little out of focus. Thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn